This Koine lesson is about the punctular action. Punctular action, this is Koine, means common. And in the Koine New Testament, there are kinds of action, emphasis on kind of action. And we've spoken of the punctular one, it's called Aorist. If you ever talk to someone and they think this is difficult, you should try to pastor, that is, teach the Bible in a church where for 30 years people have had computers. Children are studying calculus while still in high school, taking examinations where they clep out of courses and college work and are now taking and acquiring many college hours while still in high school. So if you're talking to young people, you'll really need to know that they won't find this, how do I say it, complicated. They'll find their physics class, their chemistry classes, their calculus classes, their TI Inspire calculators, which are virtual computers now with keypads. They'll find that more impressive than the common Koine New Testament, which is perfectly acceptable. Aorist just simply means punctular, and it's represented by a dot. Action, and then present was that other action that we talked about. Present tense is a line, linear, real deep, isn't it? Line, and you just add AR, root words line. You'll find the teacher of linear algebra at MIT OpenCourseWare, great resource for reviewing your math courses. He'll point out very quickly at MIT in the OpenCourseWare to those brilliant students there that linear is with a line. So the present tense in the Greek New Testament is just simply continuous, but punctular action. And why I wanted to cover that is because really this is what determines if you believe Koine or everything else. So when it comes to the gospel, for example, I'll cover a couple of texts in John 20:31. I've covered this in other lessons, but for the purpose of understanding this, 20:31, it literally says these things. That is, it starts off, I'm just picking up inside the text, the verse, these things, and it's referring to these things were written, or have been, I'm sorry, it's perfect tense, which is the punctular with continuing results, past completed with present continuing results. So it's aorist, which is punctular, present, which is continuous, and then perfect, which is past complete, punctular with continuing results. These things have been, let me fix this quickly, these things have been I don't know why I'm making so many mistakes right now. this video is supposed to be about aorist, not about errors. Have been written, and of course they remain on record. Let me erase this since we're focusing not on perfect. But again, any student in junior high, earlier elementary school, you could explain these things. They're common enough for a child to understand, and yet profound enough for people as late as high school to appreciate it. So we're talking about punctular action. So these things have been written, of course, remain on record, in order that you, and it's plural, so you can just say you all. In Arkansas, that's easy for us. You all might believe, and that believe that Jesus is the Christ, and in order that, there's another in order that while believing, now it's a present active, and it's what present tense comes in, while believing See the ing there? Believing you might have life in his name. So I won't complete that because I'm trying to simply contrast this here. If aorist doesn't exist and present doesn't exist, then I can tell you authoritatively that there is no theology according to Koine if these don't exist, and these kinds of actions in the Koine New Testament are irrelevant. Then of course the religious theologies that say a person, the gospel, or they say you have to be born again first before you can believe. 1 John 5:1 says the new birth comes before believing. This gospel says, where John wrote here, that the gospel comes first, then you believe. Then in his letter of 1 John, he said you're born again, then you're believing. And in this one text, these two actions, aorist, is pointed out. So when it comes to the gospel, these written things actually refer to verse 30, the signs that Jesus accomplished. And you remember in the Old Testament, God had Moses perform signs to cause, or for the people to cause them to believe, cause themselves to believe. So we're dealing with the aorist and the gospel. So in John, the end of the Gospel of John, he talks about the gospel and the purpose is for people to believe. In Mark's gospel, we talked about that before, Mark 16:16. It's a disputed text, but regardless of that, it can still be appreciated according to the Koine language it was written in. So what does it say according to Koine? It says the one who believes. This is aorist, punctular. See that? Punctular, the one who believes. And of course, I'll write the gospel in italics here. The gospel. There we go, because that's the object of the faith. And it says that is merged. And of course, by it would be the understood, the object here. And the difference here is one who believes, this is the subject is acting here. So this is what one does. But notice it's aorist, it's punctular. So at the end of the gospel, 16:15 says, go into all the world and preach the gospel in all the creation, or to all the creation. And then it says the one who believes the gospel, that is merged by it. So the difference here is believe is you're acting, that's what you do. You perform this most simple form of action, which is aorist. And then merged is passive, that's what the gospel does to us. And it says is merged by it. And then it goes on and says the one who disbelieves, well, that is merged by it, will be delivered. And of course delivered is passive, so that's what? By it, again speaking of the gospel. It's all the gospel here. So the gospel again involves punctular action, the most simple form, aorist tense. And just to review that quickly, this small little book I told you about, the Beginner's Grammar of the Greek New Testament, page 25, it says the main idea of tense is kind of action. And this is reality. There is a koine kind of action. And if followed or when adhered, which is referring to faithfulness to a text, then you find that the gospel appears in John prior to the simple form of action, believe, punctular, and in Mark, the simple form of action, believe, after the gospel was preached. And on page 78 it says the fundamental idea of tense is kind of action, and it says the aorist, which is what we're talking about, is a point. This kind of action is called punctular action. It shouldn't be, well again, this won't impress anyone in junior high that's working on using the modern calculators and things like that. This old common New Testament language in this aorist subjunctive I referred to in John 20 verse 31. Of course the kind of action of the aorist subjunctive is punctular. So John's gospel was for the purpose that the simplest form of action be performed by the person who hears the gospel, and that person believes, punctular. And then of course believing, continuous, only occurs as a result of being born again. And in this little book, 1927 Manual Grammar of the Greek New Testament, very tiny book, easy to read, sometimes so clear and common that it requires effort to complicate it. But it shows a dot for the aorist, and then a line for the present tense, and then a dot and a line. So it's not something you'll find students of calculus, chemistry, the algebra, even the English grammars, they won't find this complicated, but they will find it the message that has the power of God to deliver them, because that was the whole point. And of course their textbooks will be huge and large, and our textbook, this small, this is just the Textus Receptus, this tiny little Koine text with very finite, it's a finite number of root words, keywords, and then just around approximately a dozen very functional, very frequently used prepositions that when prefixed, none of that will be difficult for your students. But the point here was aorist refers to believe and points this out. If aorist and present tenses are not that which scripts someone on what to think and understand, then anything would go. And I'll cover that in another text, but as long as there's aorist tense, punctular, and then we know the gospel comes first, especially when it comes to something as important as believe. Then we have believe, then we have the new birth, which this is perfect tense, by the way. In 1 John, this is perfect tense, which is a past completed action with continuing results, and we know that one of the continuing results is, subsequent to the birth, is believing. So it's really nice, regrettable that neither is what we would know traditionally as Calvinism, nor what we know as traditionally Arminianism, or some forms of it. Everyone you talk to will deny whatever form you're speaking to reflect, because they'll say that's not what they mean, and by the time they're finished they switch sides and use each other's arguments. So I don't know what they're talking about, but I know in Koine the gospel is for the purpose that a person, John said the gospel was written that you might believe, punctular, and that in 1 John he wrote that we have previously been born and continue to be reborn, that is, be born. There's continuing results, and one of those is believing, 1 John 5:1. So it's self-evident. Now, if there is no Koine, then you can see why people have to construct things called systemic mental constructs of Calvinism, and systemic constructs called Arminianism, and systemic constructs called something called Molinism, I've recently heard, and incorporate philosophies, metaphysical theories to try to construct understandings where Koine doesn't have the insufficiency or the gaps or the voids that require such construction, mental construction by men. So aorist tense is punctular and it follows the gospel. Present tense is continual and it follows the new birth. And 1 John makes that so clear that your students will probably soak this up so fast that I would recommend you go ahead and start using this as early as elementary school. And that way, by the time they're junior high and high school, they're more rather qualified to make disciples and script other people according to Koine. But that's enough. Koine and aorist tense. Aorist again follows the gospel. Aorist is believe, the new birth, and believing. And of course there's several others. But the aorist tense may be an unusual word, but it's just a way of speaking of a punctular action. So that's plenty on such a very simple, common, I should say, common lesson. But it's very powerful, because without this we have to depend upon men and their systemic mental constructs, their traditions blended as one. If you read history, you'll find there was a time where Platonic philosophy was blended with systematic theology, and sometimes the mix of systemic theology, which itself has constructs that fill perceived gaps that Koine doesn't recognize nor have, and insufficiencies that Koine does not possess or demonstrate. And then they blend that with Platonic philosophy And then by the time you get all that mixed up, we wind up in the present day with these very abstract, complicated things, simply because Koine is not that to which we adhere. So Koine is a relief. It's like the Bible says, love is kind, useful. Koine, by the grace of God and His love for us, gave us common New Testament. What people call Greek is actually our New Testament, and it's in common language for our relief, so that we can move on and live out our lives according to what we are most certain of. And that's enough for that moment on Aorist.